example, you're suffering from 102 or 103 fever. In that situation, you need the fever to come down instantaneously, and so maybe take a paracetamol to bring the fever down, and then take an Ayurvedic supplement to build your immunity and energy in general, so that the onset of fever doesn't happen again. But if you're suffering from something long-term like asthma, arthritis, or diabetes, while your allopathic medicine can be seen as symptomatic, if you face an asthma attack, obviously definitely go for something which is allopathic and can help you with the asthma attack. But in the long term, if you want to address the chronic ailment from its root, that's where Ayurveda can come in. I don't say allopathy is wrong or bad. I say both forms of medicine have their advantages, and both of these advantages should be used together.
Hello viewers, welcome to StudyIQ. Today we are joined by Mr. Arjun Vaidya, who is the founder and CEO of Dr. Vaidya's, which is a new age Ayurveda company. Arjun finished his undergraduation from the Brown University in the United States of America. After that, he worked at a consumer sector focused private equity fund known as L Capital Asia. Post that, he decided to take his family legacy of Ayurveda forward and started the consumer focused brand known as Dr. Vaidya's, which is revolutionizing the use of Ayurveda in India. Arjun, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be on the show with you, Gaurav.
What was your motivation in terms of starting Dr. Vaidya's after living a very comfortable job at a private equity fund?
So I think the motivation goes back to my family legacy, and so I'll start by talking about my family. So Vaidya, my last name, means Ayurvedic doctor, and we come from a legacy of 150 years of Ayurveda in the family. My grandfather, great-grandfather, sort of generations before, all Ayurvedic doctors. The legacy of our business was no business. My grandfather ran a very successful clinic, which his father ran before him. And so really we had a very rich legacy of Ayurveda in the family, treating patients, taking care of consumers using the power of Ayurveda. As a family, we own 100 plus proprietary Ayurvedic formulations passed down from generation to generation. Me personally, I grew up with Ayurveda. I'm cured completely of juvenile bronchitis with my grandfather's treatment. So I grew up a believer in Ayurveda as well. When I was 17, I went to the US. I did my undergrad there. Experiences there really shaped my vision and views. So I saw the move towards natural and organic products. I saw yoga being repackaged with yoga pants, yoga mats, yoga apparel, yoga gyms, and seeing that being repositioned to appeal to modern consumers. Brought that back with me to India. Worked for almost 3 years in consumer sector focused private equity, understood a change in the Indian consumer as one who is not obsessed with imports and who's happy to consume quintessentially Indian products. And then most critically saw an opportunity in Ayurveda. The opportunity in Ayurveda was that it's a 5,000-year-old science. We have 150 years of family legacy. We have effective formulations, but Ayurveda does not completely connect with modern consumers. And so we established or started Dr. Vaidya as a new age Ayurvedic products brand with the motto of taking 150 years of family legacy and 5,000 years of science to modern consumers, to be a bridge between Ayurveda and modern consumers and to make the science appealing and accessible. And so when you look at our product concepts as well, whether it's Live It Up Hangover Shield, whether it's HerboFit Goodness of Chyawanprash in a capsule, Chakash Chyawanprash in toffee form, we're really trying to bridge this gap between the 21st century and Ayurveda. So that's really the motivation behind why we sort of got to where we are.
Fundraising, Arjun, is a very important aspect, in terms of expanding operations for a startup, and it's one of the most challenging things for a startup. One of the reasons why startups are not able to escape the value of debt. You recently raised funding from a particular corporate group in India. How do you plan to utilize the fund, and what is your vision in terms of expanding Dr. Vaidya's?
I think before I talk about why we raised funds or what we're trying to do with the funds, I think more importantly, let's touch upon the point of fundraising, right? Because it's a topic that's been discussed to death. It's a topic that's viewed with a lot of excitement. Everyone who starts a company says, first thing I'll do is I want to raise my Series A. I want to raise $1 million or a couple of $1 million. Forget the profits. Fundraising is a journey which not everyone has to be a part of. So I think stepping back, considering that I had the experience in private equity, it's very important to figure out what you are doing, what's the proof of concept, why you require the funds, and then who the right partner is. I think without doing all this background work, just saying I want to raise funds is not the right thing. Because at the end of the day, when you raise funds, you also have a partner. You also have more aggressive targets. You also need to push the brand forward. When I talk about us as such, we're a consumer brand. We took 2.5 years of completely being bootstrapped to get to some place, after which we said to take us to the next level, we require the funds. And so we'll be using the funds we've raised for marketing, for team building, for capacity building, some amount of capex, expansion in global markets. But I think what's very critical is we really understood our business, created our proof of concept, and then went out to raise funds, as opposed to saying, hey, I have an idea, now people come to me and give me capital. And usually when someone demonstrates a proof of concept, that's when people are ready to back the person, as opposed to on day one saying, hey, I just want to raise funds because I have this idea, I want to take this app to 1 million consumers. So it's very important to view it in its correct form, rather than just the speculation, excitement, and hype that we see in the press, in the media, and sort of around us.
Ayurveda, of course, has been catching up in terms of its appeal to the modern Indian consumers. But of course, it is compared to the traditional medicine that you have, the allopathic medicine. Your views on the comparative analysis between Ayurveda and the modern medicine that you have?
I think I'll address the first part of your question, which is very important to talk about. When you said Ayurveda is catching up, I think it's very interesting. And in my view, the last 5 or 6 years, from 2014 onwards, it's been a renaissance for Ayurveda as such. Independent India saw Ayurveda as second fiddle, as the poor cousin of allopathy. But over the last 5 to 6 years, you've seen Ayurveda capture consumers' imaginations. Consumers come back to Ayurveda and consumers say, hey, I want to learn more. I want to know more. My grandfather lived till 2013 and unfortunately missed this year with the big transition, with the big change, with the change in government, creation of Ministry of Ayush, all of these initiatives done towards Ayurveda, these are very new. Then the last 5 years for Ayurveda have to be viewed in isolation in the history of independent India. And yes, you're right. Whether it's macro trends, natural and organic products revolution, people understand the need to live healthy, eat healthy, stressful lifestyles coupled with the need for health, all of these things have come together to create a very interesting time for Ayurveda as a science and for brands. When I talk about Ayurveda and allopathy, a lot of people say Ayurveda versus allopathy. But my grandfather had a view, and I stick to this view, that there is no form of science which is complete. And so I view both of these sciences as complementary. Very few people actually look at it in this format, but I think my grandfather was one visionary who actually looked at it in this format. He said, look, there are two different approaches to medicine. Both approaches are good. It's just that what situation do you find yourself in, and what is your best means to end for the solution is what should be looked at. So let's say, for example, you're suffering from 102 or 103 fever. In that situation, you need the fever to come down instantaneously, and so maybe take a paracetamol to bring the fever down, and then take an Ayurvedic supplement to build your immunity and energy in general, so that the onset of fever doesn't happen again. But if you're suffering from something long-term like asthma, arthritis, or diabetes, while your allopathic medicine can be seen as symptomatic, if you face an asthma attack, obviously definitely go for something which is allopathic and can help you with the asthma attack. But in the long term, if you want to address the chronic ailment from its root, that's where Ayurveda can come in. So can you, as an individual, understand both sciences for their pros, and I won't say cons, but their limitations, and then use whatever you may seem fit or correct at that point? That's a view that not enough people are taking, and that's a view that I definitely propagate. As someone who's grown up with Ayurveda, as Vaidya in my name, I don't say allopathy is wrong or bad. I say both forms of medicine have their advantages, and both of these advantages should be used together to complement each other.
We have seen, Arjun, that in the past, yoga was one of India's biggest export and is now a multi-billion-dollar industry. And I believe that even Ayurveda has the potential to become India's second biggest export and become multi-billion-dollar industry in the future. What do you think the government should do in terms of intervention to help fast-track the process and help Indian companies reach global consumers as well as penetrate within the Indian market?
Sure. So I think when you said yoga is one of India's largest exports, yoga is very large in the West, but I don't know how much Indian companies and Indian stakeholders and Indians themselves had to do with it. So my view on yoga is that the rest of the world saw something of true value, but they saw an opportunity to repackage and rebrand. They did it They created a multi-billion dollar industry and then they're selling that back to India.
Correct.
So I think it's happened with yoga already, although some Indian stakeholders are now able to partake in this growth. I think the initial push didn't happen from India. And so when I look at Ayurveda, I believe that that's something which we have an opportunity to take to the world. So when you see our products at Dr. Vaidya's as well, each one of our products bears the mark proudly Indian. Our goal is to take this message of Ayurveda and 21st century Ayurveda to the globe. I think from a government perspective, it's very, very positive because this is the first government that's created a Ministry of Ayush. There are a lot of initiatives happening to promote Ayurveda and Ayush outside of India as well. So there is an international subsidy to participate in exhibitions and expos. There is support from the Ministry of Ayush if you want to get your product registered in developed markets. So the steps are all in the right direction. I think just the government is not the answer. I think as stakeholders in Ayurveda, whether it's doctors, companies, brands, consumers, and the government, all of us need to come together and understand the biggest problem we face today. The biggest problem is that knowledge of Ayurveda has been lost over the last 40 or 50 years. And so a 21-year-old, 25-year-old, 28-year-old consumer may not know the basics of what are these herbs, why are they good for you, as someone who's above the age of 50 may know, because those consumers grew up with Ayurveda. Today's consumers do not grow up with as much Ayurveda in the ecosystem today. And so the real core focus of the entire industry should be to spread knowledge together, to spread know-how, to spread what are these gifts that we have with 5,000 years of research with us, and what can we do to really take this forward. And I think that's not just the government's responsibility, that's the industry's responsibility together. Let's work with the government who are already taking steps in the right direction, and the Ministry of Ayush is very open to suggestions, to discussions, to conversations. But let's all work together as an industry because it's our responsibility to take this gift of India to the world.
Interesting. Dr. Vaidyas has been using the internet very aggressively. Yours is an online focused company. What is the power of online in terms of e-commerce to reach people in tier 3 cities in India and villages, and where do you see it going, with internet penetration, reaching record levels in India? What do you think is the future of e-commerce in India?
So I'll address the macro and the micro because there's sort of two things we're talking about. One is the digital revolution in India. And I think that's something which is extremely exciting, something which is in front of all of us, something which has changed our behavior over the last 5 to 7 years. The obsession with smartphones, social media, accessibility of information, products, prices, reach, selection. It's an amazing time to be a consumer. And this digital revolution is something that Dr. Vaidya has piggybacked off as well. So if you look at FMCG distribution over the last 50, 70 years, it's been offline. India is a very large country. It's not easy to build distribution. For a new brand, up against brands which have 50, 60, 100 years of expertise, brand equity and knowledge, extremely difficult. And so I think online has allowed brands like ours to disrupt the ecosystem and connect with the consumer in the tier 3 and tier 4 city who may not be able to connect with limited distribution, and give them access to what you have to give. Now, with Dr. Vaidya's, we've really innovated in the sense that my grandfather and great-grandfather believed in a free consultation. We've offered this service online. And so what we're doing really is consumers in tier 3 and tier 4 cities who may not have access to high-quality Ayurvedic doctors and care, we're actually giving this to them at their fingertips. And so they are sitting in an Anantnag or an Imphal or a Muzaffarnagar, you are able to access high-quality Ayurvedic care and products from a brand with legacy and trust. And that allows us to really take our message of Ayurveda from thousands of consumers to hundreds of thousands, even millions of consumers, and give access to consumers who may not have access in the past to the fruits and the gift of Ayurveda, which I think is extremely powerful and something that digital has allowed us to do.
But the startup industry in India generally, it's expanding. A lot of people, young people, right after college, want to do startup nowadays. Earlier it used to be like the conventional jobs. A lot of people used to write the government exams, which is great, right? You need conventional sector jobs, but you also need a new industry to come up to address the issue of unemployment. For a lot of people, startups look very rosy, but we do know that there is a concept known as the valley of death, and it's usually very difficult to sustain a startup and scale it up in a very competitive environment. What is your view for young people, who are who have a vision of taking a product to the world, and who are starting up to ensure that they sustain their business, as well as build a culture of competitiveness and expand the operations?
Sure. So I think you hit the nail on the head when you said the startup ecosystem looks very rosy from the outside. I think we're fortunate as Indians to have some of this inbuilt in us. That culture of jugaad, of getting things done, of pushing hard to make things happen. I think that's part of the culture of being Indian. So I think we're fortunate and lucky to have that. Having said that, as an entrepreneur who's built a startup from almost nothing to where we are today over a 3-year period, it's been a really, really long, arduous, frustrating journey. And frustrating because you have this end goal in mind, but there are a lot of obstacles that come in the way. Now, when I look back, I thank those obstacles for teaching me a lot of things. But I think from a personality perspective, you have to be ready to face failure. And the moment you are okay to accept failure and look at it as an opportunity to then overcome that obstacle and achieve success, I think that's when you've really sort of lived the startup life. A startup is a roller coaster. A lot of people hear this, you see it written about in the press, etc. But it genuinely is a roller coaster. You have the biggest ups and downs of emotion in one day. You may have the best day in terms of sales. You may have the worst day in terms of sales. You have the best day in terms of operations, the worst day in terms of operations. You'll face problems you could not even fathom. But to be able to tackle those problems, deal with those problems, be lean, nimble, and act quickly is the most exciting part of a startup. So I think for me, if there's one piece of advice I'll give, it's patience, thick skin, and grit. I think for me, those have been the most difficult yet most important lesson that I've learned in the last 3 years. As young people, we may get very impatient to say, hey, I want it now. I'm seeing in the press, I'm seeing this company go from 0 to 1,000. I want to get from 2 to 100 in one day. No. Rome wasn't built in a day. Have the patience, the grit, and the thick skin to say, this idea is mine. I believe in it. I will give it time and it will work. That for me is the biggest learning.
The startup ecosystem in India is also changing. It's evolving very fast. Of course, we are still very far in terms of catching up with the system that China has built. But I'm sure we will eventually overtake them one day. What are the startups or Indian companies which has achieved a particular scale, which are really inspiring to you, and you think that they're changing the landscape in terms of the face of business in India?
So for me, being a company that eventually wants to have a global footprint, I'm very excited by Indian startups that are able to build world-class products. So I'm not just talking about the startups that have gone global, but the Indian startups that have genuinely built world-class products that can be used by consumers around the world. So you look at it from a SaaS ecosystem, right? It's amazing to see companies like Zoho, like Freshworks, startups, very profitable,
Yes.
going global. Oyo is another one which is written about a lot in the press. I'm very excited to see them take serious positions outside of India. I think facing up to Uber is a big challenge. And I think Ola has done fantastically well.
Correct.
If you ask me, I'm a user of Ola, not Uber. I'm a user of Ola because it's an Indian product.
Correct.
I think it's a fantastic product. I think for me, a big moment of pride was going outside of India to Poland, for example, and finding that Zomato is the app to use to find out about restaurants. That's a fantastic achievement.
Correct.
For an Indian company to genuinely go global. And I know that there are the skeptics who say they've burned too much money, they've laid off people, etc. All of that. It's all part of the journey.
Correct.
But to say that we have Indian products that have been established in the last 5-7 years and genuinely gone global, very exciting for it. And I have so much to look up to from these people, but also so much to look forward to from the Indian ecosystem as well. There's a lot of exciting things happening in the Indian startup ecosystem, and I think we are going to have a very, very exciting 5 years ahead of us.
Thank you, Arjun, for sharing your views on startups, for sharing your journey in terms of expanding Dr. Vaidya's. And I'm sure that in the time to come, Dr. Vaidya's will be very successful in terms of taking, the Indian Ayurveda across the world, and be the flag bearer of Ayurveda around the world.
It's been a pleasure for me to be part of this interaction, and I hope to see more and more young people use Ayurveda, interact with Ayurveda, and really take forward the message of what our forefathers have left behind.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gaurav.
Thank you.